is my recap for Grand Army, the one and only season. And I did have the idea of sort of talking about each character and going through their arcs in that way, but I can't. I'm struggling to kind of keep the story in my head a lot, so it feels like I can't share or express what I wanted to about the show. So I'm just having a bit of a difficult sort of mental health evening with my mental health. So, but yeah, see if what comes to mind for me. I've got Wikipedia up with the sort of episode summaries to keep me on track a little bit. But yeah, so it's a kind of even in the first few scenes, it was clear this was like a quite a gritty sort of realistic drama. For quite a lot of TV series and movies, there's always a bit of a gap between the true reality and it being a movie, because often the reality is often quite boring if it was 100% sort of accurate, or there wasn't any sort of creative leeway and understanding for coincidences or things to happen, or certain characters to run into each other where you think that wouldn't usually happen. And I feel like with this, it's more to the end of realism, but they still kept it sort of entertaining as well in a real way. And just based on the other sort of teen dramas that I've watched, there was a real sense of Brooklyn being a character in this series. It played a really big part, and I'm not sure if it's often said that the setting can play a huge part, and it does make a difference, but it really was a huge supporting actor, I found. Just the culture of Brooklyn and the way things are there, and I felt like it captured that well. You kind of sort of poured into that reality of what life's like there in a public school, or so I think there's 5 sort of main characters, and then 5 or 6 main characters will come across those, and then there's a whole bunch of supporting characters as well. And again, each of their stories is well-rounded. It's a good kind of arc. There's no character where I feel like there was where they weren't fully developed, or there was some of their arc missing. Or even with, I think it's Jason, a saxophone player, where he has a bit of a lesser role than some of the other main characters, but I feel like they captured enough of his sort of story in there as well, and perhaps his circumstances was so much so that I feel like they allocated the time well. Like his story was, perhaps it wasn't as much in his arc of story going on as there was, for example, in Dominique's storyline, where there's more challenges and more kind of obstacles in her story, as well as her own sort of aspirations and of what she wanted to do, and then of course the big struggle with helping her family, and her family being in difficult financial situation, and so I feel like the exposure for the characters was the right amount for each one. So we start off with at the beginning, the sort of terrorist bombing, I thought that was a real good way to start, because it kind of gave the sort of the flavour of what takes place in a New York school, and how they sort of run a drill, and it's going to be similar to other sort of schools, but then again, I find with America, it's its own kind of little world, really. In some ways, each state can differ so much with laws and the way they do things. So, and it was obviously a big issue right now with, in this case, it was like a terrorist sort of bombing, but with guns as well, school shootings. That's a huge. It's a kind of, even though it was having trouble talking, but I'll see if I can get through this. Even though it was a terrorist bombing, it was kind of echoes of almost what would happen in the school shooting as well, in regards to it being a huge threat and danger, and a system of sort of safe spots in the school to evacuate, or to not evacuate, to elude danger. So some students were in a stairwell, others were locked in classrooms, and just seeing that reality of especially in America with guns as well. It's again a huge problem. So that really pulled me into the drama, and I feel like it gave it sort of a good chance to see how these characters responded, because often in these stressful situations you really get to the essence of a character, like their filters come down and you see how they truly are. So one of the main instances when they were sort of trying to stay safe was in the stairwell of Dominique, and it was Owen and Jay, or Jason, Jay. They were kind of doing, just playing what they've sort of labeled as playing a prank on Dominique, and it didn't feel, in some ways it wasn't nice, because obviously it was not quite bullying, but just someone's private property, and I feel like, just to follow the string line of that story a bit down the road, that it just got way out of hand. I feel like when they had to go to this court proceeding, or whatever sort of proceeding they went to, of theft, and it's strange, because in some ways they have a responsibility, because it wouldn't have happened if they, if Owen didn't take Dominique's wallet out, but also I felt like it was hard done by, because they didn't do the theft. They did a prank, and then I'm not sure when they were tossing the wallet between, Jay and Owen are tossing the wallet between each other. I'm not sure if it was Joey who tried to catch it, and she deflected it down the stairs. I can't remember now, but I think that may have been the case. But of course, all of that, wouldn't have happened if Owen didn't take the wallet out, and of course Jay participated in. He could have easily given the wallet back to Dominique, but he kind of carried on that. But I feel like, it was just, you really feel for Owen, especially with having that really sort of, it's hard to understand a 60-day suspension and what that means, but I guess in a critical part of the year, again, missing that kind of really prestigious concert and being picked for it, and that I'm sure will go towards his college application and all of that, like to Juilliard, I think they were looking to go to. So that kind of, in episode 1, it started that arc for Jay and Owen, and as the episodes go by, you really see how far the friendship went back and how close Jay and Owen are. And in a sense, you see sort of Jay sort of looked up to Owen. Owen was, it seems like he was the more talented, naturally talented saxophone player. And as you go, the absence of Owen in Jay's life, you kind of see how much, even though they were friends and they were peers, but Owen kind of almost, not like a mentor, but almost a leader, you know, pulling them both up. And maybe I'll just carry on with this storyline for these two characters, the arc. And of course Jay tries to visit Owen in his other, I don't know if it's a temporary school while he's serving out his suspension. And of course Owen is going through a rough time. He had bruises on his face, and maybe that's part of just integrating into a new environment where, you know, things like that can happen. One thing to reflect upon as well, which I had when I first watched it, is there's a similarity to almost like prison, really, in the sense that people in the same culture and familiarity, they would sort of have their friendship groups, as people, you know, speak the same language or from the same background. And it's reminding me of prison, and it's understandable as well, because I guess when you first go to school, it's so easy to naturally gravitate to familiarity, to someone who may understand your background, whether it's a language or, you know, culture, religion. You saw that in there as well. And school is such a sort of polarizing place, such a unstable environment as well. So it's quite, you know, I just saw that sort of, and I just thought of prison because I think it was a Louis Theroux documentary where he went there, and of course it's not that, but there was just some echoes of that sort of people from the same background or race or language as well, which comes into it. All of that blends together, and there's a certain safety or familiarity to those kind of these groups. And Jay, I think he goes to Owen's sort of temporary school a couple of times, and it was moving sort of at one of the scenes where Owen sort of again doesn't accept anything that Jay is saying, and he takes offence to when Jay mentions that, you know, he took Owen's place in that, I can't remember the name of that concert, but the prestigious sort of Lincoln concert. But even with that, where he made Owen more angry, sort of saying, you know, you just sort of rubbing it in my face now, he still gave Jay advice right at the end. He kind of, I don't know if he turned back, but he said something, you know, he gave him some sort of technical music advice, because he knows Jay so well and what he may struggle with and what maybe habits are to do things. So he kind of, even with that, he wished him good luck and gave him those bits of advice. And then of course you see Jay struggle with perhaps with him getting the spot at the concert, and Owen knowing probably Owen's the more talented and deserving musician. And then it was really surprising when he, at the end in the last episode, when Jay stood up and he had, you know, put the tape on his mouth and made that sort of stance against the fight for sort of justice and the pointing out the racism that he's encountered, and standing up for other, you know, his right for equal treatment, and put his fist up silently, and the camera sort of panned to his grandfather, who kind of, I think he was nodding, but it didn't feel like it was like approval, but it was like, yes, I can understand and I support you. It was a telling moment there for him to do that. And I wonder, like, because obviously it kind of ended there and the credits came up, but I wonder how that would have panned out if someone would have tried to escort him off the stage. And I think this was filmed as well, this concert, so it was like a stance he was making. And also what came to mind for Jay is that when he was doing his rehearsals, his teacher was saying, to go deep within himself, and he really sort of guided Jay to say, you need to find what drives you in the music, find your sound. And I feel like taking that stance was him digging deep there. It wasn't jazz music, but it was, when he sort of followed those kind of instructions of going deep and finding the sound, he realized it led to something more than the music, and he kind of stood for that in a way. But and I feel like it was for Owen as well, in regards to probably what he felt like was a really harsh punishment, and perhaps his belief that had to do with the colour of his skin, and it cost him that spot. And so there's like, he was kind of almost doing that for him and for his people. So that's kind of their story throughout. And it's an interesting, because Jay is kind of almost has an isolated story in his own self. There's overlaps, of course, because when he's in school, there's overlaps when he's kind of friendly with one of Dominique's friends and likes her, so you kind of see him pop up there as well. And he has moments when in that kind of activist sort of group, where he comes in as well. And part of that is, him to kind of speak to the girl he likes, and then he ends up sort of doing a sit-in as well for Owen, and that being part of his life, coming up with ideas on the spot. But it feels like he's got his kind of own sort of character arc and storyline himself. And then we come to Sid. So I think he's his character's written as kind of a star student, but you don't really see those star qualities. Like, you don't see, him studying really hard for papers and stuff. But obviously the series focuses more on knocking my camera over. The story focuses on that. It wants to show certain parts of his life, and it's kind of, it's assumed that he is a star-studded student, and it doesn't necessarily show that part of his world as much. That it shows kind of his swimming abilities and his passion for doing that, and for kind of, I guess, in getting a scholarship for his university. And in a sense, Sid's kind of similar to Jay, where he doesn't really mix in as much with the other. There's not like a core group of characters around him. In some ways, there's his sister, Mira, I think it's pronounced it, Mira. But it's kind of always seems like similar, sort of similar to Jay, where they kind of carve out their own arc. And he's told to kind of I think he's told to improve his university essay, to really tell something personal, and then I think when he writes it and about his sexuality, he's almost I get a sense he probably started that without perhaps the intention of sending it off. What he wrote was kind of, but then the more he wrote it, the more that kind of built up to say, yes, this is my truth, and this is what will get me kind of ahead in the essays, because I'm guessing competition is extremely fierce, and they want something extremely personal and unique. And I feel like that helped him access that part of himself and his sexuality and his race as well, his culture. That all kind of came together, and it gave him a space to write that, to be truthful to himself, where he had to step up his uniqueness in his essay. So it was kind of an obvious topic to choose something with those things. And I found his I don't know if it would call it like a counsellor. I know that means something different in America in school sometimes, where it's more of a guidance counsellor than like a therapist in that sense. But yeah, I feel like they had a really unique, great chemistry, where she was really encouraging him and every step of the way. And then I think there was the moment when he found out he got into Harvard, and it was great to kind of have that sort of intimate sort of celebration of him, his sort of teacher or counsellor, and then Mira is there as well, where she hit the play button and Sid was like, "No, what are you doing?" And not knowing that that's what you had to do to find out. That's a unique, actually, because usually it's a letter and you read the first sentence and then that tells you all you need to know about whether you got in or not. But this was like a video, and I wonder what would happen. I'm guessing there wouldn't be a video for if you didn't get into Harvard, of like a sad, like a smiley face, but a sad one, a sad emoji, and saying, with regrets. You don't. But yeah, so that was interesting to watch. That was Sid, and his love interest in that. I don't know his name. Trying to see where that comes in here. Vincent comes to mind. Victor. I knew it began with V. So yeah, Victor. I felt like they had a really good sort of connection, and it was immediate that Sid liked Victor, and you saw that straight away. And I thought it was great that it followed that through, and almost it wasn't a huge drama when he was sort of intimate with Victor. It was kind of his first sort of meaningful sort of expression of his sexuality, and I felt like what he had with is it Flora, I think. Flora, I think. It was kind of, I felt like he did love her, but of course it was probably mixed in how that worked. And I think as he learned more about himself, you could probably tell it was more of a different type of love he had for her than what he was trying to kind of almost shape that love into romantic love as well, and going through his struggle to accept who he was. And you really felt for Flora as well, because even in the last sort of scene they had together, where she came to his house, and they had that scene when they were just talking on the sofas, and you can tell Flora still, really cared about him, but then she was still having to process the not quite betrayal, but just the reality on her side of things as well. She could see that, that Sid was going through a kind of transformation or an understanding of the truth of who he was, but she was there was collateral damage in that, and as well as her trying to be understanding of his sort of journey, she had to also deal with her own feelings about being hurt and lied to as well, and so in the end it could understand Flora's. So there's a moment where I thought she would stay and talk things through more, but then it was almost like a switch flipped, and she just quickly, she kind of stormed off suddenly, understanding that she couldn't be there for him in that way, especially at that time. There's too much for her to process and deal with. But there was a moment where she almost put that aside and put him ahead, and just kind of, because obviously she is in love with him, but then I can imagine her own feelings quickly bubbled up and they became front and center, and then she just had to kind of get out of there and deal with that. But yeah, it's great to see sort of Victor and Sid's sort of connection to go on there. And even though Mira was a sort of supporting character, and I kind of wanted to see more of her. She was kind of she had an active role in drama and sort of feminist issues that she was doing, and she was kind of putting together, creating a sort of drama set of that. I think there was spoken word and things in there. So, and yeah, I feel like she could easily been of a main character. I thought there was enough there that if there was kind of space and time things, then that she could have really been developed into a main character. I thought there was a lot that we didn't really see from Mira, but knew that it was there. And she was very close to Sid. It was kind of a nice sort of sibling relationship to see that. And in episode 1, Sid tried to find her. He kind of tried to get to her, just make sure she was safe and okay. And then of course throughout, I think when Mira posts one of her sort of nude pictures, gets sent around a lot, he's trying to protect her, and yeah, and I think I get a bit confused with who's like in a senior year. I think Sid's senior, and then some of the others are junior, right? I think that's, but because sometimes a connection as good friends, you just feel like they're on that sort of the same academic year, when I think they are. Anything else to say for Sid and Mira? I guess that leads to Layla, because on the first day, sort of Sid sort of sticks up for Layla, and he puts her on. I think when he's kind of nice to her, then there's obviously that list going around of I'd say desirable girls in the school, and his friends say want to put Mira on the list, and he's like, unless you give me a different name, and he puts Layla's name on there, and immediately I'm like, oh, that's the last thing she needs. But then of course you learn that she likes the attention, and she's kind of wanting to break through and find herself in the school, and with like the so-called popular cool kids in the school. And you could almost sense the tragedy in Layla quite immediate, really, and you can relate to it as well. Just her kind of the desperation to be popular and to be liked, and also a sense that it feels like she has so much to offer, and that and there's a really unique way of showing that in those kind of anime sort of animations that happen, those anime cartoons, where it shows her feelings of and what she feels like she's capable of, and sometimes you show like her strength, or how she can be like powerful and strong, and also there's a sense of showing her anger as well. And it's nice to see that she's not like a completely alone. She has like a really good friend in Rachel, and I find it's such a good friend to her. And again, as Layla goes through her own journey of, you know, experimenting and trying to impress and the guys who she thinks will make her happy, and to kind of build status in the school, it feels like sort of she leaves Rachel sort of stranded a little bit. Rachel is interesting because she's kind of in the middle of groups. She's friends with Layla, but she's also part of a dance team, so she's kind of got access to both worlds. And of course she's aware that the dance team, or a lot of people may not like Layla. There's certain run-ins that happen where and so the whole journey is just of sort of Layla trying to find herself. You know, she's got it's kind of a rich storyline with her being adopted and her kind of almost adopting a faith as well. So she's kind of, parents adopted her, and she's almost adopted a faith that perhaps wasn't something she was born with, but kind of sought out. That her parents were from, you know, her parents were Jewish. They may not have been religious or practicing, but I think she was desperate to just carve out some identity, and I think the more she didn't know about her roots, the more sort of uprooted or less grounded she felt. And it kind of shows as it goes on with her actions in the school and trying to fit in with a certain group of people, and things get really dark with her in terms of those throughout the episodes. The start, I think, of most or all of them, there's the typing of those sort of sentences. Some of those are like political statements, or some of them are just sort of complete hatred. And then you learn, obviously, that's Layla, and she submits that sort of bomb threat to the school. And I thought actually she would be caught, because I thought she submitted that from her own laptop, and I thought, like, with the investigation or any sort of cyber criminal sort of department would be able to track her. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe she gets away with it, and at the end, sort of, maybe there's some even though there's like chaos and destruction, and in towards the end, but Layla sort of finds some calm in that storm, where right at the end, when they kind of going out evacuating the school because of the bomb threat she sent, which I still a little bit confused into why. I know some of the reasons. She was angry and she wanted to kind of express that, but yeah, it kind of got her Rachel back, which I found interesting, like her doing such a big action, and she was desperate to. You can see there was good in her as well. She's obviously getting counselling from the rabbi, I think it was Rachel's rabbi, and then she was but she was not understanding that there's almost a bit of a self-indulgent quality about getting repentance, where, you know, she tried to I don't think she even apologized to Rachel. She kind of just almost said, I accept that you weren't there for me, and she doesn't take any responsibility really, and she still kind of struck that off the list, saying, yes, I've done that, and it didn't feel like she really grasped the true tool of that, you know, that sort of repentance, and to really communicate to the other person. And so there's a true understanding from both parties that, okay, this is what happened between us, and this is what I'm sorry about, but this is, didn't feel like it. Felt like it was more of just her doing her side of things to try and get back to a happy place, instead of actually really embracing what caused all of these difficulties for her. If I go to episode 8, does anything about Layla here? So you kind of see her, and towards the end, George, which texts her as well, and I think, there's almost again, it's the darkness with her. She's kind of sort of semi-involved with one of her classmates from the drama club, and then she's immediately still drawn to George, but you sense part of her's growing as well, because she's honest with George. I think she texts him back saying, I'm not who I used to be, or something like that. Well, you can tell it's like almost an evolution of her finding herself in some way, even though it's through a dark sort of way. And her sort of love interest from a drama club, I don't remember his name, he looks at some of her really talented sketches and drawings, but then in the other book that lays there's all of the super dark stuff that kind of gets swept under the rug when I think she just comes over and they're kissing and being together. But maybe even with Layla, I can sense that there's kind of her solitary arc as well, where she kind of overlaps in other groups. But it's kind of, and it's only like Joey and who am I missing? Dominique, of course. They're the ones who have loads of supporting characters around them. So Dominique, it's her. She's got a tight group of friends at school. Then she's got her family as well. So there's a tight sort of group of supporting characters where Sid, Layla, and who did I start with talking about? Oh yeah, Jay. They didn't have so many big supporting characters around them. They're kind of a lot of scenes depicting them sort of on their own almost as well. And I felt like with Dominique, a lot of the scenes was her with her friends, and her struggles. And I can't remember if I talked much about Dominique at the start, but just to quite summarise her arc again, if I have, hopefully I haven't. She was just constantly up against it, I feel, with her story. She was doing all the things all kids want to do at school, like, have fun, mixing with friends, boys, and aspirations for college, and she wants to get into psychology, but then there's this huge kind of arc with her family and how that really just impacted her world, and she was kind of torn between trying to do well in school and also trying to help support her family as well. And she was willing to, that was kind of thrown upon her, the proposal to kind of marry this person for their family to get paid and for the green card and all of that process. And it's really nice to see them change their minds and realise that, because I think for her to enter that contract, you would have to stay in the city, so she wouldn't be able to go to those universities she mentions, like Hopkins or Washington University. And I feel like it was such a powerful moment when her mum kind of said, we decided we don't want that for you, something that you don't really want. And it's kind of a freeing moment, an understanding as well of sort of her family really embracing Dominique's sort of aspirations. And I think her mum said, seeing Dominique at her birthday party with her friends and how they were complimenting her for getting into the summer internship, and that she's a genius, and they kind of almost got to see a side of Dominique that they didn't really have time to see, really, because everyone was just so, working and taking care of the children there, and it was just a chance to really see a different side of Dominique, and it was great to see that. So, what other characters? Oh, we got Joey. Yeah, Joey's probably a character that I, yeah, kind of was interested a lot with in Joey's character in that. Um, yeah, she obviously had her sort of girlfriends from the dance team, and Anna, who was Tim's brother, who was part of like the small group of male friends she had, and in a sense they're all one set of friends, but also you could sense that there was sort of friendship circles within that friendship circle. So like Luke, George and Tim would hang out together a lot with Joey, and sometimes they all hang out together, and yeah, you can almost see the complications for Joey, where I think she was liked by all of them, all of the guys. She had such a kind of open and I guess sort of, yeah, it's one of those people where I think she loved people's energies, and she kind of gravitated, and the more people she was around, the more energized she would feel, the more it would kind of fill her up in that way. And she would feed off of that. I feel that's a really big part of her character, where she thrived in sort of company and being around friends, and it's interesting how she was kind of having feelings for Tim, but also was friendly with Luke and George as well. But then there was the complications of one of her best friends, Anna, Tim's sister, and her, saying to her, "I don't want you to kind of to be with her brother," and it was that kind of forbidden sort of thing, and it was nice to see that sort of Joey doing her dancing as well, like in amongst all of her busy sort of social life. In that way, she was like carved out time to do her dancing, and it was nice to see that sort of solitary time for her, where it was just her time to do that and to let go, and so much kind of expression in that. So quite it was one of my favourite scenes actually, of when she was kind of in these kind of dance studios, and it was like seeing the instructor, and it's all about just dance there, and just there's no cares for anything else. So it almost allowed her to, it's almost like a meditation, it allowed her to sort of focus her mind on just that and be in that moment on the dance. And it's kind of a contrast to when she was socializing, where her attention would be everywhere with this person and that person, and with dancing, that all of that energy kind of came together in one laser focus, and she was able to almost almost recover and give herself time. And I thought that was a great way to depict that. Of course, it was the big sort of incident with Joey, where she was raped, and it shows the sort of grey areas with that scene, because it started off, of course, as sort of consensual fun where they were kissing, and it was like, and then it takes just 1 second for something like that to turn into an assault or rape. And I find I could really feel for Joey, where it was so confusing, because those were her like really close friends, and then of course there were substances involved as well, and there's a moment where I think she was saying it hurts or stop. I try to think. She made it clear that no, this is not okay. and then she asked for Tim's help, and I think what he's thinking is, I don't know if it's marijuana, because it goes into Tim's point of view, and he's kind of blurry and not really there, but he is there in some ways, but not able to intervene, I think. So he's almost like a passive sort of watching of what's happening, but unable to act on that. And I feel like perhaps his senses and are quite dulled with whatever substances he's had, and there was that sort of whole unraveling of dealing with sort of going through that trauma, and having her sort of younger sisters trying to understand what rape is. And I think when they asked her that, she came up with like a really sort of good, clear explanation that was sort of easy for them to understand. I think she mentioned something about someone hurting her body, which was like an accurate way of saying it, but not in a way that they wouldn't understand if she was to kind of go into. And of course she was trying to protect her sisters as well, and not sort of make things worse for them. Just skipping ahead and following Joey's arc, there was that scene under the bridge where when she met up with Luke, Tim, George and Anna, I felt like that's such a brave thing to do, to just meet up with them. And like when she originally wrote that text to the group, to those guys saying, "Can we meet?" I was like, oh, that's... And the scene was just so tense to watch. It was like, I was just like, oh God, this is like, it's so unbearable to see Luke and George sort of deny everything. And you'd almost get a sense that they believed what they were saying, but also they believed that that wasn't the truth. It's an interesting how they conveyed that, and they did it really well with Luke and George, where it was kind of subtle. It was really subtle in the way they denied it. It wasn't like a huge, dramatic sort of, how dare you, it was just like, I think George or Luke saying, "I thought you were going to apologise to us." It's how sort of deluded they were. And you can understand substances playing a part, but also I think there was the line where it's consensuality suddenly turned to no consent, but they couldn't stop themselves almost. Whether it's partly with just their personalities, and also the play of substances, which sort of not magnified but exacerbated those sort of dark tendencies they had to do what they did. And so I felt like that scene really did a good job, where I believed that they did nothing wrong, but also knowing that that wasn't the complete truth, that they're selling that to themselves, that it's like a very hollow sort of plaster on the truth, that they're sort of in denial of what's happened. Then you see Tim sort of break after Joey leaves and walks away, because she kind of stands there for such a long time, just sort of desperate for Tim to speak up for her, knowing that he was there, sort of witnessing what happened when she was trying to, when that attack was taking place, that assault. She was kind of looking over and calling for him there, and then you kind of see, which was really good to see, like Tim sort of say, "No, this is the truth," and just also as Joey's kind of in that scene, Joey's kind of selling the record straight, saying, "No, it was rape, you did assault me, it wasn't consensual." And you could see Anna's sort of face change in her crying. The crying was, and that's when the camera pans to her face, you could see that she's come to a realization that Joey's telling the truth there, and it's through, sometimes just through, that truth kind of came through Joey's voice and her expression. It wasn't just sort of, as Luke and George would put it, Joey being Joey or being dramatic and feeling embarrassed and all of these other things. It was, you could sort of feel the truth come through, and then the final sort of scene for Joey is in that dance studio, and that was just such a nice way to kind of round off her arc in the series. It was such a sort of healing thing. I think the instructor said, the body knows what to do, and it's like, it's in so many ways that was like a healing instruction for her to help sort of begin the journey of sort of healing and living her life again. And then you saw her, obviously, sort of the more she's getting into her dance, the more sort of she was able to break out of this sort of huge heaviness, traumatic heaviness that was shrouded over her and just keeping her sort of not living life, sort of living under all of this stuff. And it was like her breaking out of that. Not to say her trauma suddenly gone, but she was kind of now, trauma wasn't suffocating her. She had kind of broken through that, and now she was kind of actively, on that path of healing. And it was really well expressed through her dance and the way that she progressed, where she's starting on her back with her hood up, and then slowly she was at the front, and then she takes a big heavy hoodie off, which doesn't seem as practical to dance with, to do these dance moves. And then she's at the front, and then she does a little sort of performance with two other people, and she kind of, there's a scene of where she just ends it with her sort of lying, flat on her back in sort of exhilaration and ecstasy and also exhaustion as well. You can tell it's a mixture of everything, and then the dance class clapping, and it felt such a great environment for her to be in, where no one cared about anything but just dance, and it was just all about that. And one thing to mention in Joey's arc is in her private school, and where you learn that one of the girls, when she's in like one of the religious classes, one of the girls, she's in a small group, starts staring at her, and if she interprets that she's talking about me and making fun, when it kind of ends up that she too was raped, and they have that really important moment together, which probably bonds them for the rest of the time they're at the school. And that understanding was just, I felt like, was exactly what Joey needed, and I felt that was a real moment. And it's just a reflection also of those who are raped or assaulted and just are not able to speak up. And in this, I don't know the other student's name in that sort of Catholic school, but she mentions that she regrets not speaking up, but also there's understanding of why she didn't speak up, or was able to. So that was a real moment there. Hopefully I'm not missing anything hugely major. I feel like I am, but maybe we've covered a lot of stuff. But yeah, I felt like it was a really satisfying sort of ending for the character arcs of Dominique, sort of, with her love interest being able to resume her life and not like everything going off the rails just so she could do this sort of green card marriage thing. And so she's kind of doing a summer internship, and she's doing that. Joey is actually, one thing we forgot to mention of Joey is Tim's message at the end saying, "Can we talk?" So perhaps there's more sort of healing and maybe some justice happening if there would have been a season 2 for Joey. and maybe some healing for their potential connection between her and Tim. I don't know, but again, a satisfying ending of just seeing Joey in that dance studio, and then Jay's kind of stance. It feels like he's just doing what he feels like he needed to do, and he's standing up for his rights, for what he believes in. So you feel like it's kind of a powerful ending for his character. And Layla is kind of one of the characters where it still feels very, if there was a season 2, it would just be very, perhaps you'd continue in that sort of spiral into being a darker character, but also paradoxically understanding more of herself within that sort of darkness as well. And I have a feeling that if there was a season 2, that she would just, because there's moments in season 1 where she kind of did dark stuff, but then she also was self-aware of it and she came out of it. Like she did a bunch of, she kind of, for example, spoke to the rabbi, and so there's a moment where she was self-aware. So there's a sense that she would, I think, continue to do dark stuff, like meet up with George again with that message, and still see sort of the her love interest from the drama club. So she'd probably end up hurting him and probably hurting herself as well in George's character, especially with what he's done to Joey. And I feel like she'd probably lose Rachel again, like, because she's kind of conflicted, where she's drawn to George's world and doing this dark stuff, but also wants Rachel's sort of friendship and stability, and it feels like that wouldn't be a good recipe for her. And I feel like, if there was a season 2, there'd be more dark things happening for Layla, but I'd feel like eventually she'd come out of that, but it feels like she would have to learn those really hard lessons. I feel like that would just be her path. And of course Sid going to Harvard and potentially still being a connection with Victor, that would be cool. I think I've covered most of the sort of main characters, I think. So yeah, Joey, Dominique, Sid, Jay, Layla. Yeah, I think that's it. So so kind of it was difficult to watch the show, was just with my mental health, the way it is, and I won't go into it too much here, as I do the sort of mental health vlogs, but obviously it feels like there's an overlap, because me doing this, it's going to sort of mental health comes with it whatever I'm doing or creating. So I got a sense, I felt some of it was hard to watch and absorb, some of the stuff. So, but it's kind of a gritty reality of the show, and I feel like that was one of the few sort of teen dramas that really showed it wasn't so sort of TV. There wasn't a huge gap between sort of that TV creation side of things and reality. It felt like the drama was kind of closer, and it's not a criticism for those shows who are, it's made more for TV. So it's like, if you were to kind of overlay that to what happens in real life, you think that will never really happen that way. But it's kind of, I think that's what the writer and creator, who is Katie somebody, Katie Capiello, I don't know if that's butchered her last name, let's call her Katie. It created the show, and I wonder what else she's done as well, because she wrote all of the shows as well, I think. And I feel like it'd be good to know what else she's done or is doing, and so I may look up more of her work to see if that's in there as well. With looking up the summary of Grand Army, it came up with the show Euphoria, which they say is a similar sort of teen drama, sort of a gritty teen drama. So I may potentially